around in circles, and maybe it's an expanding gyre, but we go around in circles and we eventually come back to the same point that we were at a long time ago, and on a calendrical rhythm as well. So it's not at all ironic that the holiday of Hanukkah, which is so much associated with defending religious individualism, is assailed every year by an overwhelming tide of assimilationism. And that the struggle of Yehuda Maccabi and the Hasidim to defend Jewish particularism and the Jewish way of thought, Jewish way of practice, Jewish way of life, against an overwhelming global tidal wave of sameness, of fit in, of be like everyone else. That's the same struggle that we have today. And so with that thought, I want you a lichtig and Hanukkah. I hope you found this lecture useful. Thanks very much for watching. Okay, we've had a quick look at the tremendous Maccabean revolt. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes, it'll be a very short mini video, to look at the dynasty of the Hashmonaim, that is the kings and high priests that followed the Maccabean revolt. And this is a period of tremendous consequence in many ways, but I'm just going to treat it very lightly today because we're going to be coming back to it repeatedly over the next coming videos. Basically, the period that we're discussing now is from the Maccabean revolt, which happened in the mid-160s before the Common Era, up until the entry of Pompey, a Roman general, in Jerusalem in the year 68 before the Common Era. So about 100 years. Now, the truth is, the Maccabean dynasty, known as the Hashmonaim, continue, particularly through the line of Mariamne, a great-great-granddaughter who married Herod. But the Herodian dynasty is quite distinct in many ways, and that extends from the middle of the first century before the Common Era up until the Great Revolt, which results in the destruction of the temple in the year 70. So we're going to look at the first 100 years from about 167 to about 68 before the Common Era. And bear in mind that we've got another 100-odd years that are quite distinct. We'll spend a lot of time on them from about 68 before the Common Era to 70 of the Common Era. Okay, let's look at this first 100 years. I think the most significant thing to say about the Maccabean dynasty is the remarkable territorial expansion that took place under their watch. Have a look at this map here, which shows you the center of the Maccabean revolt was essentially in Judea, right? In the region around Jerusalem, in the Judean hills, and so on. It was fairly landlocked. It had some access to the Dead Sea and, of course, the Jordan River, but otherwise it was efficiently blocked from the Mediterranean and from significant population centers to the north as well. Under the successive Maccabean kings, however, under the brothers of Yehuda Maccabee and then under his nephews, you begin to see significant expansion, in particular under the reign of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, also known as John Hyrcanus. You see very significant extension to the north throughout Samaria, expansion to the coast as well, and most significantly for historical purposes, the expansion to the south into Idumea. This will become extremely important because this is the region from which Herod will descend, and the Idumeans and their conquest by John Hyrcanus is one of the more controversial periods in Jewish history, because this was the first and only time that we have in recorded Jewish history of a forcible conversion of a non-Jewish people. The Idumeans were accepted into the Maccabean kingdom, and they were also forced to accept Judaism. Now, what exactly that Judaism was that they accepted is something we're going to have to explore in the next 3 lectures of this series to some degree. But This was something that the rabbis later severely criticized. They viewed the negative implications of Herod's rule in particular as a consequence of this forced conversion. And as a result, Judaism put essentially a ban on any type of state behavior like this, or any even communal behavior like this. Forced conversion is simply not a thing in Judaism as a result. You will also see significant expansion under Alexander Yanai, one of the Maccabean kings who was definitely not favored by the rabbis. His wife, Shlomtzion Amalka, we'll discuss in a moment, she had a very major impact, however, on the promotion of the rabbis, the sages, who again we're going to discuss in the subsequent lecture. The Maccabean kingdom, which we might even say was a small empire, actually expanded dramatically in all areas of activity, not only geographically and militarily, but also in terms of its political reach, in terms of its cultural activity, in terms of its economic activity. We have an amazing series of coins coming from the Maccabean kingdom. Here you have a beautiful coin which is actually in my possession. This is a pruta, the smallest unit of currency that was circulating in the Maccabean era. This comes from the era of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, or John Hyrcanus. And you can see on this coin there is a double cornucopia. You can see how primitive the coin is. It's stamped off center, and it's lumpy and so on. The double cornucopia symbolizes prosperity and wealth and so on. And on the other side of the coin, this is very difficult to make out, but you can see lots of examples on the web. And it's an interesting kind of take in which Yochanan Kohen Gadol refers to himself as being part of the commonwealth of the Jewish people. This is one of the significant areas in which the rabbis were critical of the Hashmonaim, because historically the office of king and the office of the high priest were separate. The office of the king was assigned to the tribe of Judah ever since David, and the office of the high priest is specifically among the Kohanim, obviously, which are the descendants of Aaron, who was of the tribe of Levi. But among the Maccabees, they took both of those offices to themselves, which the rabbis felt was an inappropriate arrogation of additional authority. And some of the kings kind of tried to soften this by saying they rule with the consent of the commonwealth of Jews. Others were less hesitant about proclaiming themselves both high priest and king. This is also an exceptionally important period because we see the rise of a new class of authority figures within the Jewish body politic, quite possibly following a much earlier trend, but only now, perhaps with state authority, do we really see these individuals beginning to rise to authority. I'm talking specifically about the sages, also known as the Pharisees, primarily in Christian readings. These are essentially the rabbis who would become the great leaders of the Jewish people, inspire them, shape the way in which we understand Judaism today and things like this. There's a lot more to say about this, but you'll have to wait till the next lecture. But for now, let's just look briefly at Shlomtzion Amalka, which was an unusual woman. She was the widow of Alexander Yanai. She was known in much of the Greek literature as Salome, but beware, there are several Salomes. This is not the Salome that is associated with John the Baptist. This is Salome Alexandra. Shlomtzion Amalka means simply peace unto Jerusalem, the queen. Her name Shlomtzion means peace unto Jerusalem. At any rate, she was, unlike her husband, a great fan of the rabbis. Her brother was very highly placed among them, and when her husband died, she was allowed the freedom, now as sole ruler of the Maccabean kingdom, to institute a new reign which was very religious friendly. I know it sounds strange because just 100 odd years earlier they had fought this battle for religious liberty, but under the successive Maccabean kings, this religious freedom was strangely curtailed. And Shlomtzion Amalka, in many ways, revived it by giving the popular rabbis, whose base of support was really among the wider population, not specifically from the temple ritual, not specifically from the sacrificial cult, and so on. So Shlom Tzion HaMalka, in many ways, actually restored this period of religious freedom of expression, and her reign was regarded as a period of unrivaled prosperity, both materially and spiritually. Unfortunately, this all came to an end. We will recall that when Yehuda Maccabee was engaged in his struggles at the beginning of the Maccabean period, he actually appealed to the Romans for the possibility of intervention. They did not intervene at that time, but it helped to stay some of the ambitions of the Assyrian Greeks in Israel at the time. But with the death of Shlom Tzion HaMalka in the year 67, her sons engaged in a brutal conflict over who would control Israel, who would be the next king, who would be the next high priest, and so on. They both independently appealed to the Romans, specifically in the figure of Pompey, shown here, a general, who ultimately ended up in intervening in that fraternal conflict by invading the region and taking Jerusalem in the year 63. Hard to imagine a fraternal conflict like this with an appeal to an outside source turning out any differently. But at any rate, that's what happened. Pompey enters in the year 63 and effectively establishes Roman dominion over the land of Israel. The Hashmonaim continue, the dynasty goes on, and ultimately it will become the Herodian dynasty. Herod marries one of the last daughters of the Maccabean kingdom, but that's something that we'll have to explore in a further video. For now, though, we've had a quick look at the brief rise